from. My name is Sean. I'm delighted you joined us for today's ESPC community webinar. Today I'm joined by Albert Janschot, MVP, who will be covering a developer's introduction to Copilot Studio. We love hearing what you guys have to say, so we're enjoying conversation about today's webinar and more on X. Our handle is @ESPC_community and our hashtag is #ESPC26. Tweet us, tag us, and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our Learning Hub, which updates the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting espc.tech and clicking the Learning Hub tab at the top of the page. Don't forget to join us for our next webinar, Architecting Multi-Agent with Copilot Studio, with Reshmi Aklo, MVP, and Vasha Mahesh, taking place tomorrow, Wednesday, 13th of May at 11 a.m. CEST. To register, visit Microsoft Copilot Week registration page. Join us at ESPC 26 this November in Amsterdam. The newly announced program features 120 plus sessions across 9 expert-led tracks covering Microsoft 365, Copilot, AI, Power Platform, security, governance, agents, and more, including real-world insights from Microsoft experts and MVPs. Super early bird tickets are available until 26th of May. Use code COPILOTWEEK for additional savings and book using the QR code. Early bird pricing ends Friday the 15th of May. Secure tickets to EPBC 26 and expand your knowledge across Power Apps, Copilot Studio, Copilot, AI, Power Automate, Security, and Dynamics 365. Use code COPILOTWEEK for additional savings and scan the QR code to book now. After the webinar, we'll have a dedicated Q&A session. Type any questions you might have into the chat box. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. The webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass it over to today's presenter. Hello, Albert. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for the awesome introduction. So let me share my screen. And there we go. So for the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you through a developer's introduction into Copilot Studio. I've seen that there are going to be a number of sessions this week, actually, on Copilot. So it's awesome to be part of that and share a bit on our experience or my experiences in general on building stuff with Copilot Studio. Now, I'm assuming that most of you have built something with Copilot Studio and that we don't need to do a thorough introduction into the platform itself. But I've got a few slides for you just to make sure that we're all talking on the same topic. Now, like I said, my name is Albert Jan. Everyone calls me Appy. I put in my details. If you've got, you can find my blog here. We're not going to bother too much with that, but we'll share the slides. If you reach out, I'm more than happy to help. To get started, when we talk about a low-code platform that Microsoft provides, it's the Microsoft Power Platform. And it's a bit broader than just Copilot Studio. There's a bunch of cool stuff in there. But today, we're definitely going to talk about Copilot Studio. One thing I do want to mention is that Copilot is an integral part of that Microsoft stack. And it also ties into the Copilot experience. So it's not only agents that you can build with Copilot Studio, you can actually extend M365 Copilot or the Copilot that lives in Dynamics. So there's different options when you build agents. That's why it's really interesting to discuss what you can achieve with Copilot. Now, if you think about that, all of the good things that you get within the Power Platform, like connectors or AI Builder or Dataverse, PowerFX, those are all available in that Copilot Studio experience. So from a developer's perspective, you can build full code solutions and you can amend stuff, but you can actually also reuse building blocks that you have in the Power Platform. So that's what I want to walk through today, some of the scenarios that you would have. Now, when we say Copilot Studio, when we say talking about Copilot Studio, what we actually say is that it's the end-to-end AI experience where you build your agents that either are living in your own environment or that live in M365 Copilot that you extend. Now, if you look at the experience that you would have, how you typically would start is you can either describe what you want. So you can describe using natural language, this is the agent that I want to build, and give that to Copilot Studio, and let Copilot Studio create the agent. You can also do everything yourself. So you have full control if you want to add more, let's say, logic or be more deterministic. You can definitely achieve that. Now, once you have your first agent, what you can do is you can add triggers. So you can explain this is when the agent should fire up or start doing things if you want to have more autonomous experiences. You can also say, I don't really work with those triggers. I'll just have the user experience or the conversational experience that you have. Now, once the agent starts giving replies to your users, then all of a sudden you start to consider, okay, what kind of memory do I want to add, or what kind of data do I want to add to that? And that's where you actually are going to add knowledge. You're going to add files. You're going to add websites. You're going to add potentially data shares or Fabric. That's where you are going to add that knowledge and amend the memory of your agent. Now, once you start doing that, all of a sudden you start contemplating whether you want to have more curated topics, so more control over what the agent will actually answer you. That's something you can do with topics, and you can have full control over the topics that you have. In addition to that, you can add so-called tools or actions. They were called actions a little while back. They're called tools now, but that's connecting to backend APIs, and that allows you to interact with external systems, with other systems, and do interact with it. So retrieve data or create information in a specific system. Now, once you're done with building your agent and you added that knowledge, you connect it to the systems that you wanted, then you can publish your agent. And when you publish your agent, you can actually publish it to multiple agents. Multiple channels. And multiple channels means you can deploy it to Teams, where it lives as a Teams agent. You can build it or deploy it to your own custom front end, or you can do it to M365 Copilot. So it depends a bit on the scenario where you can publish to. And finally, there is monitoring, where you can go to and actually see what is happening in your agent. It's a pretty decent dashboard, but potentially you can do additional things by hooking it up to application insights. And then finally, you can integrate with Azure Cognitive Services, Foundry, Bot Framework, all that stuff that's been out there for a while. And Microsoft is in the process of renaming stuff to the Agent SDK, to Microsoft Foundry tools. So you'll see some of the things are being renamed as we're working with it. Some of the things are still having old names. Some of the things are having new names. But generally speaking, all the stuff that lives in Azure, where you would have full control, are actually available for you when you're building agents. So that brings me to the very first demo. So let's have a quick look at the first thing, source code integration, because we all know that the Power Platform is a low-code platform, and I like to joke about that, but there's ClickOps, where you click everything together, which is a great way of doing things. It's really fast, but in the end, if you want to have repeatable results, if you want to achieve something, you potentially want to make sure that you store that information in a source code repository. And I'm coming from a full code background, so I really like to have access to my source code. I want to see what's being generated, whether I'm doing low code or not. So the first thing that I typically do, or we typically do, is that if I create an agent, and let me quickly go through that process. What you see here is my Copilot Studio experience. I created a My Event Copilot. I gave it a name. I didn't give it a description yet. I picked an agent model. I gave it no instructions. I added some knowledge. So this is some basic configuration. If I go to my topics, I'll see that I got some out-of-the-box topics. Those are created for me. I don't have to bother too much about them, but those are available for me. If I go to my system topics, I also see the available system topics. And if I now go to my solutions, what I can do is, if I go to my solution, I see the Power Platform solutions that are available for me. And those Power Platform solutions are sort of like a wrapper or a folder that you can think about it like it's a vehicle that that you use to go to a different environment. So if you're doing dev, test, and production, you'll probably use those solutions. If you've been doing Power Platform for a while, you might have seen solutions before. But what I did is I created that agent demo solution. An agent demo solution, as you can see here on the right, if I go there, it says connected to Git. So there we go. Source control status is connected to Git. And what I see on the right is that if I go to this agent solution, agent demo solution, what I see is that there is some content that's going to be in there. So I can go to my objects, and I'll see here that there are different components being added to this solution. If I go to my agent, I see that I've created the team navigator. So it's a different agent than I just showed, but there is an agent in there. If I go to agent components, I'll see things like topics, default components. So there's some stuff in there. All those different things live in a solution. And if I then go to my Git repository, what I can see here is because I connected that solutions to Git, or in my case, Azure DevOps, I have this neat little folder called Agent Demo. I see my solution name in there, Agent Demo. And if I go in there, what I actually see is all the different components that are being part of that solution. Now, I see a question in the chat. Is the preview environment a prerequisite? No, technically, it's not a requirement. So what you can do is you can configure stuff into a production environment. I can do everything in production if I want to. Now, I would argue that if you're building complex agents, it potentially is a best practice to make sure that you have at least test and production, so you're not changing stuff in production, but it's not a requirement. If you want to connect to the source into Git or Azure DevOps, then it is a best practice to work with solutions, but also solutions are not a requirement to build your very first agents. I would say solutions are a bit more of an advanced scenario. I think when you're building stuff, it's pretty quickly that you want to do it this way, because I can show you, if you do this, if you connect it to a Azure DevOps repository or a GitHub Enterprise repository, what you get is you get all those bot components, and I get a configuration. So if I look at this, here I see I have this topic or this topic or this topic. And if I look at the configuration of that topic, what I can do is I can actually look at what does this topic do. And this topic triggers when the user says goodbye. And there's not too much in there. I can go to the data object, and I can see that unrecognized intent, if the user says something like bye for now, goodbye, what will happen is it will reply with a question saying, would you like to end the conversation? And depending on what the user says is, okay, I'll close the conversation, or I'm going to say, go ahead, and I'm listening. So what this does is this allows you to have control, have access to the source data that lives behind it. And you can see in the bot components that on the one hand, it's the set of topics. It's also the selected AI model. So if I look in here, I see here that this demo buddy, if I look at the data, what is it using? Well, it's having a bunch of instructions. It's having a set of conversation starters. And those are all configured in my agent, but now I have source control access over those specific things. So when you're creating your first agents, I would say that it is sort of best practice to at least hook it up and have access to that source control. Because if I look at that source control, I have access to all that data. And if I go back to my solution, if I go back to that source control tab, what I can see here is that anytime I change anything, it will be reflected as a change in here. And what I can do is I can say, I'm going to commit this change to my repository. I can also check for updates, and it will validate whether there have been additional changes. So before doing a commit, I usually click on the check for updates, but no, nothing has changed. So I can say, please commit and some minor changes, and I can say go ahead. And what it will do is it will push this to my Azure DevOps repo. So this will definitely help me in the long run on getting a somewhat better understanding of what's happening. So it's no longer just a maker or a citizen developer clicking through stuff. No, all of a sudden I have version control and I can go back in time and see what actually has been changed. Now, especially with AI, it is important to be aware of all the changes that are being happening. So this will happen, or so this will give me a bit more control. With that, let's go to the next scenario. So I've created my very first agent. I hooked it up to source code integration, and I decided I was actually working pretty decent. Everything is doing the stuff that I expected. Now, all of a sudden, I want to have a bit more control. I want to have control over what we are asking a user or what responding to a user. So in my demo scenario, let's say I've created the agent reasons over some data, and all of a sudden I want to have my agent give me feedback on user stories. Now, as a developer, I've been working with user stories. I like working with user stories. The thing that I don't like is that I spend a lot of time translating an email into a user story or giving a colleague feedback on a user story. So I figured I could use AI for me to do that. Now, the thing is, I wasn't really happy with what GPT 4.1 was doing for me. I wanted to do something differently. Or maybe I want to have a bit more instructions within my agents, but I don't want the instructions in the agent task or a specific step into my agent. So if I look at that now, the next thing that I probably wanna do is I wanna make sure that I let's say can have my own model, get that model coming from Foundry and connect to that. So let's have a look at the next demo. Bring my own demo, and bringing my own demo should be fairly easy. Why? Because Microsoft has a lot of interesting things for me that are created already that I can reuse. So if I switch back to my browser, you will see that what I can do is I can go to my topics again, and what I can do is I can go to overview, and I can see that I have a thing called tools. What I can do in tools, I can click on adding a tool. I can also go to the top two tools, and in here you see that I already added a specific tool. So what I can do is I can click on add tools. You can see all the available tools that are out there. Interesting, it flickered a bit. But what I can do is I create a new prompt, or I can use one of the existing prompts that I already created. In this case, I went with review user story. It's already there for the sake of time. But what I can do is I can go to the review user story, have a quick look. Let me click this away. And I now have something called a tool with review user story. Now, the name and the description are important in this case because the orchestrator, the agent that has been created, will use the name and the description to decide when this should be triggered. So now it only triggers when I say something like review user story. Potentially, you might want to add a bit more elaborate description, a bit more details. Don't add too much. It will only confuse things. But I can say review user story and give the user feedback based on the input. Now, if I would save this, I can test it. But what you can see here is there are some additional details when this tool may be used. Well, this tool may be used at any time. Meaning that in this case, the agent decides when the tool is being used. I can also decide myself. I can only also say I want to do this from a specific topic. So I can have some control over that. Next, I can see the instructions. And what I did is, let me make it a little bit bigger. I can see that I say review a user story for technical complexity and impact. When reviewing, you should consider following important topics. I heard something about TOGAF being an important framework, so I want to make sure that we adhere to the TOGAF standards. If I scroll through this is a pretty lengthy prompt, and I have some input, user input. There's only one, the user story. I have some sample data, so I can test it. Now, if I would click test, what this will do is this will run that test input, that test user story, and it will use my instructions against ChatGPT 4.1 to come back with feedback. And it says review user story. It gives me some feedback. It looks okay. I would be okay with that. Now, what I can do is in this prompt, rather than using GPT 4.mini, I can do 4.1. I can do GPT-5 chat. I even went with Anthropic models, so I enabled Anthropic on my tenant. I don't have to. What I also can do is I can use Foundry models. And in those Foundry models, I have DeepSeek and Phi. I can connect to any Foundry model that I've deployed. So what I do is from my Copilot agent, I connect to a Microsoft Foundry instance, and then all the deployed models in that Foundry instance can be used, whether it's DeepSeek, Grok, another DeepSeek deployment, GPT-4, anything, Phi. So any model that you deploy there can be used. Now, what I can do here is I can say, well, how about you use DeepSeek? And what I now can do is I can say test. I can run this prompt, and the prompt will be executed. It will show up, and it's going to take probably a little bit longer. It takes a few seconds to run everything. And the only caveat here that is important to be aware of is that the selected model should reply within 30 seconds. So if you pick a model that takes a long time to give you feedback, then it potentially times out. So if it doesn't reply within those 30 seconds, it will not work. Now, in here, you see I'm having a response, so I can say, sure, I'm going to say done. I'm going to change it here again because it's a UI bug thingy. I can click on save. And if I now would test my agent, I can wait for it to be published because it's going to take another second. But as soon as it's published, I can test my agent and I can ask it, hey, can you review user story? How about you give me feedback? Now, this is the demo effect. Always takes a bit longer than I want to. So what I can do is I can say, I'm going to make sure that I'm tracking between topics. I can ask something like, can you review the user story? As a developer, I want to be able to configure different models in different AI models in my custom front end. Make sure I can select multiple models, use authentication, and work from there. Now, this is not really a good user story, but I can ask it. And you can see that the agent will generate a plan. It will consider, hey, I have a tool for reviewing user story. It inputs my user story that I described as a input, and then it will wait. It's going to take, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds because DeepSeek isn't necessarily the quickest model that's out there. But this gives me the control to have specific prompts and specific models for specific scenarios that I might want to have my agent to be able to solve. So let's say I have my technical review agent that will help me do technical reviews. I can have a tool to review a user story. I can have a tool to review technical designs. I can tweak and change those prompts based on the requirements. Now you can see here that it came with this really long description. It's aligned by TOGAF. There is some technical complexity. It needs an abstraction layer. There's architectural impact. It gives me a recommendation, final assessment, and it does a suggestion for a refined user story that is or potentially should be slightly better. Cool thing about this is that in here, I can see that my tool executed completely, and I can look at the rationale and get myself a bunch of feedback based on what is being used. So here you see it's executed the tool successfully, and I'm all happy now. So that's me if I want to have control over the questions a user can ask and what model should be selected besides the model that I get out of the box in my agent. The next thing is adding knowledge. And when you add knowledge to your agent, you actually instructing the agent to use that knowledge to come up with answers. So if I look at this scenario, here I can add additional content to my agent. We know that when you pick a large language model, there is some knowledge in the model, but potentially not the latest model, not the latest knowledge. or potentially not your corporate knowledge. So what I can do is I can add that knowledge to my agent. And what I can do is I can hook it up to SharePoint, I can hook it up to Dataverse, public websites, and that are all things that you get out of the box that are straightforward for you as an end user to connect to. But what you also can do is you can also use the Azure AI Search Index. And the Azure AI Search Index will give you some more control. It allows you to do basically everything yourself in your index to connect to your data. So let's have a quick look at that as well, because, well, what's better than doing demos? What I can do is I can go to my agent. Oops, I'll go to this one. I can go to my overview. I can see the details, and I can see in here that I added a specific file. I added a specific file from SharePoint, and I've added that Azure AI Search. Now, if I go to my Azure AI Search, what I will see is if it loads, I will see that this is connected to an Azure AI Search Index. I don't know why it's not loading. I'll try it again. I will add Azure AI Search, and you can see that I've got a demo search index created. It will ping me the available indexes in a second. So in here you see that there is a knowledge source, a random number / index. There's also an unsupported index, something I can't use. But what I can do is I can do preview index details, and it will tell me, okay, there's 27 documents in there. I can add it to the agent. Now, I'm going to leave that because it's already added, and I'm going to quickly go to Azure and show you what is in the index. Because what I can do in that index, I can do every step, every configuration myself. So, oops, wrong tenant. Let me switch to the correct tenant. And let me go to the Azure AI Search Index. So here I have my AI search. And in the search index, I see that I've got a knowledge source. This is the knowledge source that we just saw. There is a Azure Blob knowledge source. And what does adding a knowledge source do? Well, it creates a index. That's the stuff that we'll be using. It's an indexer. That's the stuff that fills the index. So this actually makes sure that something is happening. And the indexer uses a skill set to actually do all the steps. So if I go to my indexer, I see that I have my knowledge source indexer. It ran a few times successfully and one time only partially successfully. Also some errors. But what I can see in here is if I go to my settings, I can see that it has an index, a data source, and a skill set. It runs on a daily basis. So every day it is going to be indexed. If I add some new content to my data source, it will end up in the index at least one day or within 24 hours. I can change that if I want to. I can say like, okay, I want an hourly index or a 5 minutes index. And obviously there's costs involved. So for demo purposes, once a day is more than enough. And if I go to my skill set, I can see that there's 2 skills in here. Now, this is a bit of a hard part. This is not really something a maker or a low-code developer will do. This is typically something that an AI developer or an AI engineer would pick up for you. But in here, you see that there is this text split skill. So what it is do, this picks up a file and then automatically splits it by X amount of pages. So we're not putting too much pages into a single step. And then what it will do, the next thing is it will use the Azure OpenAI embedding skill to actually generate an embedding. This allows me to use AI to query that data set. Because if I do this, and if I go back to my knowledge, what I now can ask is, what can you tell me about HR at Contoso? And if all goes well, this will look through the knowledge sources. It hopefully will find some content for me. And in here we go. I see that it came up with this really, really long response, and that it is coming from the Contoso Electronics Employee Handbook, including a link to the PDF that has been indexed by that search indexer. Now, obviously, if it's just a PDF, I could have uploaded it to SharePoint. I could have uploaded it somewhere else. But with that indexer, you have full control of all the different steps that you might want to take. Meaning that we use this approach for one of our clients where they wanted to retrieve certain parts of legislation. So what we did is we went to the Dutch legislation, we pulled in that data, we built an indexer that went to the data, indexed the appropriate properties, ignored some other properties that we didn't need, put everything in that Azure AI Search Index, connected that Azure AI Search Index, and then all of a sudden users could ask their questions about Dutch legislation over or in that agent, and then have it reason over the actual index, giving us the control we needed, as well as the flexibility for end users to play around with the data and ask questions about that information. So definitely have a look at the Azure AI Search Index if you want to do some of the, let's say, advanced scenarios on knowledge management. Now, the next thing is that we saw we can add custom models, we can ask our own knowledge, and then at some point you decide it's enough. We're going to deploy. We're going to use this. We're going to use this agent, and then you'll probably want to see what are the trends. What's happening with my agent? Are users engaging with my agent? Is knowledge being used? Can I get insights on the stuff that is happening? And the cool thing about that is that you get a lot of the stuff out of the box. The thing is, some of the things that you might want to see or you might need are not there in this interface. It's a really good interface. There's a lot of information in there, but potentially you want to build your own reporting or your own dashboards. And that's where application insights is coming in. So let's have a quick look at that. Let me switch to my agent. Let me have a quick look at the channels that we're having. So if I go here, that it says Microsoft authentication, so only Teams and SharePoint or Microsoft 365 SharePoint channels are available. The agent is not yet published. If I go to the button publish, I can say, oh, I'm going to publish this agent. And as soon as I publish the agent, what I will get is I will get that things like analytics are showing up. So my event Copilot currently does not have analytics because it's not published. If I go to a different agent, and let me, because I should have agents, right? Let me have a quick look. Let's do webinar assistant. And let me see if that one is published. Also not published. Ooh, that. Let's go to the Teams navigator. I'm 100% sure that one is published. So if I go to my channels here, it says published at some point, meaning that if I go to my analytics, should be able to see analytics. Could be that there are no analytics yet. No, hasn't been used in the last 7 days. So it's empty. But what you will see here is conversation settings. You will see the outcomes. You will get some reactions. You get some customer satisfaction. So you see some details. If I would do the last 30 days, hopefully there is some data in there. Nope, there is no data in here yet. But you get the gist, you get details. And then what you then get, the next step is that what I can do is I can actually connect to the application insights. So if I go to my settings, if I go here to settings, I have some advanced options. I have the option to go to Application Insight, and in Application Insight, what I can do is I can actually add a connection string. So the connection string is coming from Application Insights. I can select what should be logged. So I can say enable logging, including conversation details, sensitive properties, and execution events. Important for sensitive properties, you need to consider if you actually want to log those, because sensitive properties might contain user details that will end up in your logs, and other people might be able to access those logs. So this is a typical, I would say, discussion point. Do you want to turn it on? For demo purposes, I did. In production scenarios, we typically are not turning it on, because if you do this, what you then get is you get I added a log analytics in space. In that log analytics space, you get the custom events. And in the custom events, I already opened it. What you will see is that any question the user asks will end up as a log entry. So what I see here, if I start, the first thing that happens when a user asks a query is there is a topic start, then a topic action, then a topic end. Then the bot receives that message. Then a bot message has been sent. Another topic start, end, start, action. So all those different steps are in there. And what you can see is if you open that, you can see that there's custom dimensions, meaning that everything you do is being logged and you can write your own queries. So in here, I am in that that agent. So if I go back to my Teams Navigator, if I go back to analytics, in the last 14 days, no analytics are being captured. Why is that? Because all the chats I did are being done from the test your agent window. So the analytics I see here are not capturing anything I put in this chat window on the right where I'm actually testing. So when I'm developing, nothing is logged in the analytics for end user. And that makes sense. Like this is the report from the production stuff. What I do on the right is more of the development and the test stuff. If I go here, if I go to my log analytics space, what I see is those events are actually logged. They're in application insights. And here I can see, oh, this message is coming from the PVA studio. And for those who've been around for a long time, there has been Power Virtual Agents, which was the predecessor of Copilot Studio. So you see, it's still called PVA internally. And what I can see here, I can see the conversation ID, the from ID. I can see that recipient name, so the actual agent that being executed. And if I close this and I go back to the bot message sent, I can then say, oh, let's have a look and see what's in here. Here I can actually see the message that the bot has sent me. So the welcome message that we configured is actually returned in here. So those application insights are a really added value if you want to get additional logs. I see a quick chat saying, is Azure Access required to work with Copilot Studio? Could you explain the relationship and connection between Azure and Copilot Studio? Now, the cool thing is if I go to my Copilot Studio, if I go to my agent, there's no Azure requirement. So I can build an agent in Copilot Studio without having access to the Azure tenant that lives. However, if you want to do the more advanced scenarios, like bringing a custom AI search index, or using Microsoft Foundry, or using the application insights, in that case, then you need access to Azure. So to get started, the answer is no. You can use Copilot Studio without access to Azure. If you're building more advanced scenarios, if you're growing in your journey, there might come a point where you want to use certain Azure building blocks or Azure components. But it's definitely not a requirement to get started. And I would recommend to definitely get started to play around with it, and you'll quickly we'll find out where there are gaps, or maybe for your use cases, there are no gaps. But it's good to be aware that there's no requirement to have Azure experience or have access to Azure to get started with your very first agent. Now, there is one final scenario or one final demo that I want to quickly walk through that potentially does require some full code experience and potentially would. And that is when you want to build custom UI. Because what we've seen that knowledge store, we've seen that agent. So I can go to my agent, I can go to my channels, and I can say, okay, I've got this sample. I can say share a preview. I can say deploy it to Microsoft 365 or SharePoint. And if I click on demo website, it will say, okay, sorry, this is turned off because you have authentication in place. So I cannot run this specific agent on a custom website. Now, there are use cases, or at least we've encountered use cases, where you do want to build that agent in your own website, where you want to expose that agent potentially anonymously available, or with authentication in place. And luckily for us, that is something that you can achieve. What you can do is you can use the stuff that Microsoft provides you. So you can build your own web client, and that web client you have full control over. So you can design, you can configure, you can build it the way that you want. So let's have a quick look. I've got a index HTML file, which is the Copilot Studio client integration with web chat sample. There's no UI in here. This is just out of the box. But what I can do is I can say I'm going to start this. So this is going to take a second to load. This will render my HTML page. And what will happen is it will recognize that I'll need to sign in. So hopefully any second now, it will say something like, there we go. I'm going to close it and I'm going to say, again, try it for me. See, there we go. So it didn't show me the pop-up, which is interesting. There we go. So now I get a pop-up and it will ask me to sign in, which is a good thing because I configured this agent to require authentication. Now, if I click on let me sign in, it will say, sorry, I can't sign you in. And I will explain in a second why. This is complaining about some configuration. What I can do is I can change this URL and I'm going to say localhost. And it will come up again with this sign in pop-up. I can say, well, how about you sign in now? And now all of a sudden it will say, hey, I'm the web agent, a virtual assistant. Just so you're aware, I sometimes use AI. So now I have this chat window that I have full control over. So I can go in here, I can ask Claude or Copilot to make this look pretty because this is just a chat thing. It doesn't look really that good yet, but I can ask it to give it specific colors, specific fonts, specific emojis. I can put in everything in here. And the only thing that I needed to do to build this is I needed to pull in these two things. So the bot framework web chat and the authentication package. And I needed to create a settings.js file. And in that settings.js file, I needed to configure the app client ID, the tenant ID, the environment ID, and the agent identifier. These four things are coming from Copilot. So if I go to the settings, if I go to my advanced settings and I go to my metadata, I see here my environment ID, tenant ID, agent app ID, and schema name. Those map on those four settings that I have here. So if I configure these correctly, what will happen, it will automatically trigger that authentication window. So it will ask me like, hey, do you want to authenticate? And if I configure this correctly, everything will work as expected. The cool thing is I have full control over this HTML. I have full control over this CSS, and I can use it to make it look pretty. I can make it a pop-up if I want to run it on my own website, but I at least can ensure that if I add knowledge, if I add tools, that authentication actually happens and that I can configure it. Now, the last thing, what you see here is in those settings, that app client ID. So there is this app client ID. And it says here, the app ID of the app registration used to log in. This should be the same in the same tenant as Copilot. And if I go to my to my Azure, and hopefully I still have it open. There we go. So what you see here is this is the same application ID as I have here. So 2617. This one is Copilot Studio Demo. And what I did is in this environment, I went to the Expose API. Went to the API permissions. And I wanted to make sure that there is delegated access to Copilot Studio. If I enable this, then this app registration now allows me to sign in, and through that Power Platform API or the Copilot Studio experience, I can actually connect to through my own custom UI to the agent that I have created. Now, because I'm also a bit lazy, there is this wonderful command that you can execute. So you see in here what I have is I have this. If I have the Microsoft Graph components, what I can do is I can create a new service principal where I provide the app ID, which is the Power Platform API, and then just connect the Power Platform API to this data set. meaning that now all of a sudden I have a full control over my look and feel, over the UI, and I can say, or I can build the interface that I want, whether it's a pop-up, whether I run it on my website, and it can use all the building blocks of your agent, including the signed-in user, meaning that I can run tools on the user's behalf, I can access knowledge that the user would have access to, and I can have that AI reason over all that information. And with that, we went to a bunch of demos. I talked about how developers can use the Azure components and connect them to the Copilot Studio experience. It's not a requirement. If you're just getting started, there's no requirement to start with Azure. But if you have more advanced scenarios, you can definitely do that. So come up with creative writing prompts to generate content. Connect to Azure Developer Kit to make sure that you have access to the code that is behind the agent. Create or deploy your own language models if you want to. Connect to Azure AI Search for more advanced scenarios. Connect with API calls directly by doing HTTP calls or using MCP servers if you want to. Capture the telemetry that you require and implement application lifecycle management. All those different options are available for you if you're building that stuff. And with that, are there questions? I think I already answered the questions in the chat so far.
Yeah,
Just want to make sure
did you answer the burned one, the Azure access required to work with Copilot Studio?
Yes.
Yeah, saw that.
So there's no requirement to start with Azure, but if you want, for some of the advanced scenarios, you do need Azure.
Perfect. So yeah, thanks for the great presentation demo. So now we're getting the Q&A section. If you would like to ask a question, please feel free to type in the chat box now. So the next question is, what are the big differences between building agents in Copilot Studio versus traditional chatbot platforms?
I would say that the biggest difference between Copilot and a traditional chatbot is if you have a traditional chatbot, what you will do is you will have to spec out or write out everything yourself. So you have a question from a user and potentially different answers. The cool thing about giving an agent specific knowledge is that it can try to come up with the answer based on your instructions and the questions of the users and the knowledge that it already has. So you have a more autonomous experience where the agent will try to come up with the answer. And that's also potentially a risk. Like you're less deterministic, meaning that the changes are your requirement and you're in control versus you let the agent decide certain things for you. So it's a bit tricky. I like it a lot, but I also see that clients sometimes struggle a bit with it when they ask, "Hey, how much control how much control am I willing to give up to quickly get to an answer versus how much control do I want to take, making sure that I give the answer to my clients that I expect?"
Perfect. Next question is, what is the easiest way to connect external APIs into Copilot Studio?
I think I missed part of the question. What's the quickest way to?
Yeah, what's the easiest way to connect external APIs into Copilot Studio?
That I would say depends a little bit on the type of API that you already have. If it's a RESTful API, what you can do is, I'm going to quickly share my screen again, if that is okay. I'll do screen 2. There we go. So basically everything you do in an agent is connecting to tools. If I go to add a tool, what I can do is I can use the connectors. So all the Power Platform connectors that are in there, you can use. So if you already build a custom connector for your API, you can use either the existing or a custom connector. If you have a fully spec'd REST API, what you can do is you can connect to an existing REST API, or if there is an MCP server available, and an MCP server can be a wrapper around an existing API, you can use the MCP experience. So from that perspective, I don't like giving the answer, it depends, but it kind of depends a little bit. The quickest way, if there is a custom connector, use the custom connector. Next up, connect to the REST API. And for the best experience, I would go with the MCP control.
Perfect. Next question is, if you install Microsoft Graph locally for development purposes, does it allow you to read properties from my tenant? For example, would it be possible to retrieve information such as the amount of storage being used?
Yeah, the answer to that is definitely yes. And it depends a bit on what you mean with install Microsoft Graph locally. What I can do is I can connect a MCP server. There are Graph MCP servers that you can use. Then you actually get the tools that are available in the MCP server, and you can use those tools and you can query against that tool. There are Power Platform MCP servers that you potentially can use. You can also connect to the actual Graph API, again, either through the REST API or through the connector. That does require a little bit of tinkering to make sure the authentication is implemented correctly. But what you then can do, if I go to like storage, I can do the, I'll do connector, Power Platform. Because I think the admin Power Platform connectors are in there, Power Platform for admins. Let's see what's in there. I can see create environment role. Potentially there is something about storage. I don't know. Let me search in here, storage. Yeah, storage warning thresholds. So there are, for certain cases, already connectors available. For certain, you might need to build them yourself. But it's definitely possible to read properties from your tenant, like storage being used from SharePoint or Dataverse or Power Platform components.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's all the questions, Albert. So on behalf of the ESPC community, we'd like to extend a big thank you to you again, Albert, for taking time out today at Carry Seminar. Really appreciate it.
Cool. Then thanks for attending. Berend, I know there is a community sample. I don't have the URL by heart. Feel free to reach out, but there is a community sample where someone built a skill that uses the Power Platform MCP to get a governance report of their complete environment. So that could potentially be interesting for you as well.
Perfect. So that's the end of today's webinar. Thanks everyone for joining, and you'll receive an email with the recording. Thank you.
And bye-bye.